So what is this video about? I mean, mate with two knights. They always say there is no mate with two knights. So this is like clickbait, or this is a joke, or what is this? Well, let me tell you, there's checkmate with two knights. There's actually checkmate with two knights. We're going to see it right now. And also, let me tell you something else. Um, it's very hard, it's tough, and you might need your opponent to have a pawn. You might need it. Okay? If he doesn't have the pawn, then you will see what happens. It's not like there's no mate. It's like there's mate, but you need some things. Anyway, uh, how to mate with two knights? Let's talk about that. So let me show you. There is checkmate with two knights. Okay, there is checkmate with two knights. Let me show you the example. You have something like this, and you play the move knight f6 check. Your opponent plays king h8, and you play knight f7, and this is checkmate. This is checkmate with two knights. Okay, so the quote "there's not checkmate with two knights" is not entirely true, because here we have totally normal, totally legal checkmate with two knights. Of course, to get here we needed to give a check here, and black could have played the move king f8. We need to say that. We need to admit that it was not a forced mate. It's not forced. He can escape. But that's the thing. That's what they mean when they say there's no mate with two knights. They mean there's no forced mate with two knights. That's what they're saying. So yeah, you can give the check, and if they go to the right square, you're not winning here. You need to know that. But they can still make mistakes. So you can still play. If you get into king and two knights versus king, you can play. If they make mistakes, you win. If they don't make mistakes, well, it's a draw. So yeah, that's one thing I wanted to say. The other thing is that you can actually get into a forced checkmate with the knights position, but you're going to need your opponent to have a pawn. Let me show you why. Let's say we have something like this, right? And it is your turn. If it is your turn, you could try something like knight here, and then after that, you can play knight here. It's going to be mate, and he cannot escape from this. This time is more forced, but there's another problem. The other problem is stalemate. I know many of you hate stalemate. Well, we're not going to talk about that here, but the thing is that, yeah, stalemate is happening here, and we are not winning anymore. So that's where we are going to need a pawn, because if your opponent has a pawn, then it's a stalemate, but he has a pawn, so he can move the pawn, and then it's not really a stalemate. Exactly. So yeah, they can move some pawn over there, for example, okay, like this. Like you play knight here, he moves a pawn, and then you mate. Okay. So again, there is a mate with two knights. This is a forced mate, right? This is a mate that you can actually give, you can actually force. You don't need your opponent to make a mistake or a blunder. But the only thing is that you need your opponent to have a pawn, so he breaks the stalemate, right? So he's not really a stalemate. So I think I already showed that the quote "there's no mate with two knights" is not true, and I think we already saw that the topic mate with two knights is much more interesting than it seems to be. I'm going to show you examples, real life examples, where a player has been able to force a mate with two knights. Force. I'm not talking about my opponent blundered and I won. I gave a mate in one because he blundered. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about you force a mate with two knights. So, of course, as you could see, we are going to need an enemy pawn. So let me show you the theory for this. This is what is going to happen. Here, white has a pawn advancing like this. And this is a king, two knights. What's going to happen is that you're going to keep this pawn blocked, because you don't want the pawn to move. If the pawn can move, they will move it. They will get a queen, so you will have to take it at some point, and then it's king and two knights versus king, and they will avoid the mate. They won't get into a mate position. They know these are masses, so they know how to avoid it. So they won't get into a forced checkmate position. So this is the idea: block that pawn as much as you can, because you don't want to allow that pawn to move. And the thing is that you block the pawn, and after that you're going to be bringing your king. You need to maneuver with the king and the other knight to force the king to a corner. Then after that you will create the stalemate position idea we saw, and then after the stalemate you will mate, because he will have a pawn, so he will be able to move. Let me show you on the board. So I know this is very confusing, so let me show you on the board. Just bring your king. This is what happened in the game, right? Maneuver, force the enemy king. You need to continue activating your king. That's what he's doing. At some point, he maneuvers a little, with the knights. And, okay, this is the moment where he releases the pawn, because he already saw that bringing the knight over here is mate. So, do you see? He plays king h6 at this point, when the king's already in the corner, and his plan is knight, knight. Without the pawn, this could be a stalemate. With the pawn there, this is mate in 2. So they have to move the pawn, you move the knight, they move the pawn, and you move the knight. That's how you mate with 2 knights when your opponent has a pawn. And this is pretty forced. You can force it. Let me show you another example. This time, it is a white to move. Again, black has a pawn. That's a good thing. He has a pawn. That's what you needed, because at some point he will have the pawn to avoid the stalemate. So again, we maneuver with the knight and the king as much as possible, and we try to force the king to the corner. It's not easy, so we're not going to analyze that. It's super tough. At some point, he releases the pawn because he saw ideas. Let me show you. He knows that he's in time to force a checkmate position. Okay, here he moves the king, but let me show you. If he moves the pawn, you can play check. He moves, and then maneuver with your knight. He gets a queen, and just in time you mate him. Okay, let me show you that line. So check, for example. I mean f2. You check. They move. This is checkmate position. All you need is a check. You move. He has a pawn, so it's not a stalemate. He can get a queen, but it's fine because then you mate. Okay, that's a nice line. I think something like this is going to happen in the real game. So the master plays this, then you block the king in the corner, and black resigned. But basically, what happens is when they move the pawn, you maneuver. When they get the queen, you mate. Mate with 2 knights. One more time. So let me show you this example here. It is black to move, and we're trying to force the king to the corner as usual. That's what is happening. You're maneuvering with the knight and the king. The other knight is blocking the pawn, very important. So you keep maneuvering, keep making progress, force the king to the corner. The king's trying to escape, but you don't really let him escape. It's tough, it's complicated. Also remember 50 moves. So if we have 50 moves on the board, it's a draw. Okay, 50 moves without pawn moves. Now there was a pawn move. So again, you can start 50 moves again before it can actually be a draw. So, okay, we maneuver, and at some point we get into this. At this point, white resigned. Why did they resign? Well, basically you're going to give a check here, and if the king goes there, you bring your king, bring your knight, and bring your knight. Okay, so let me show you. They can play this. You can give a check. Everything is controlled over here, so they need to go there. Then you bring your king, they play, you maneuver, they get a queen again, and you mate. That's what can happen in the line. If instead of moving the pawn, they move the king, it's basically the same thing. Just make sure he doesn't escape. Just king first, and then same thing. You can give a check. He moves, maneuver. This is even easier, right? And then you mate. Yeah, that was easier. So that's the idea for this mate with king and 2 knights versus king. I know it's very arguable. I know there's a lot to debate in this kind of positions. I can tell you this is a beautiful theme that I really enjoy. So if you have questions, if you have anything to say, let me know in the comments, and I will be happy to interact. Like the video if you think it was good and interesting. Subscribe if you think the channel is also good. Thank you very much for your time. I catch you guys in the next.